Gabi, welcome to Beyond Belief. I was recently on your podcast. It's a pleasure to have you now on mine. And I think one of the interesting angles, every story here is welcome. But I think at the same time, I'm always curious about like, what's the interesting spin here. And I think there's two things that I welcome in particular. One is you're Sephardi, like Middle Eastern Jewish, but still raised Orthodox Jewish. And I think that could be interesting to get a glimpse into some of that subculture, if you will. And then you
Yeah.
are a mental health professional, and so getting your take now on the outside mental health view, we've had other mental health professionals, some even other religions. And I always appreciate a bit of that kind of more technical or academic analysis of what was going on at the same time. Welcome.
Shalom, Faith, thank you so much. I'm honored to be on. I'm excited to be here to do this conversation. This is the first time on any podcast I'm really openly going to share everything about my story, like whatever might come up. I'm not religious now. It's even hard for me to say. It's been for like 3 years, but I've been private about it and now I'm finally I think opening up. So I'm really grateful. Thank you for the opportunity. And also just a small correction, I'm Bukharian Jewish, which it's Central Asian. Definitely like the roots go back to Middle East. There's been migration until we eventually get to Central Asia. But yeah, the culture is phenomenal. It's amazing. The food is awesome. If you've never had Bukharian food, it's amazing. Go try it. So thanks again for having me. I'm really excited to have the conversation.
For sure, and I appreciate the correction. My a lot of my knowledge, even of Jewish history and stuff like that, is so warped and from this really narrow Ashkenazi Jewish yeshiva world. And it was basically you're either Ashkenazi or you're everybody else. That was everybody else was,
Yeah,
and everybody else was obviously Sephardi because that was the other
yeah,
denomination. So I
right.
grouped anybody from India all the way through Morocco. You're Middle Eastern in my mind as a starting point.
I'll tell you, I don't know about Israel specifically, but in America, every migration of Jews that have come to America, there's always been like almost like this othering. I'm pretty sure German Jews were one of the earlier migrants that came into America. So let's say in the late 1800s. So then when the Jews from Poland and Hungary start coming in the early 1900s, there's this othering of these. Oh my gosh, we're separating ourselves. And there's always been like this initiative to help, but there's always been almost a subtle racism. And I don't know if racism is the right term, but I'm sure you get what I'm trying to say. But what's interesting is that Ashkenazim in America have actually this term Ashkenaz as this umbrella term. Ashkenaz literally means German Jewish. This umbrella term of Ashkenaz to mean like all European Jews it's really modern actually. There used to be a lot of beef between Polish or Hungarian or German or British or French. It didn't always used to be mixed. Now with Sephardi Jews, it's also an umbrella term of everyone that's not Ashkenaz, but it's really not the right term because Sephardi means Spanish. And
Spanish.
then, yeah. So generally from Uzbekistan, there have been Sephardic and Ashkenazi Jews that came to Uzbekistan over the years, but generally Bukharian, they've been there. I think I might be mistaken about this, but they've been like in the Central Asian region, mostly Uzbekistan, but other parts of Central Asia as well. Probably for about, I think, 1,000 years at the earliest. And then before that, Iran and Syria, Iraq, and the Levant region and Israel before that. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
interesting. It's exactly to your point, and this is, I think, true for a lot of subcultures. But when you zoom into any subculture, you suddenly see the division in it.
Right.
When you zoom out, it unifies into some whole. And
Yeah.
so it's absolutely true. Again, growing up in yeshiva, we just knew that Ashkenazi Jews, the blanket term, we were better
Yeah.
than all the Sephardi Jews.
Right.
It
Right.
was a known fact. But if you
Right.
zoomed in, we of course had a ton of beef with the Hasidic Jews, who are a type of Ashkenazi
Mm,
Jewish, but
right.
they were obviously of lower caliber. I actually point out that's the reason why Israel is so full of divisiveness. In America, for example, I think in most of the Jewish diaspora, if you will, any Jewish community is by definition a minority and therefore appreciates any Jew to a large degree just by virtue of them being a Jew. We're two Jews in a city full of Christians or whatever. But then
Yeah.
you come to Israel and it's a Jewish majority, and now everybody
Yeah.
hates each other because
Exactly.
now how am I going to make myself special and how am I going to stand apart?
Right.
So you get this
I
inverse behavior.
I'd love to get your take on this, honestly. I think from my experience in America, and again, I think the racism that I experienced from, let's say, Ashkenaz communities, which I was mostly a part of in schools, like it was real and I don't want to minimize it. But I think also outwardly, nobody would be like proud to be racist. Although, like when you're in high school, like sure or whatever. But like in general, like everyone knows, like, oh, you shouldn't really be racist. Granted, there are some assholes that embrace it. I've definitely experienced a lot of racism, and definitely like when we talk about Jewish dating, which to me has been like that's like to me the reason why I'm no longer religious today. If I had to pin it down to one thing, it was the Jewish dating system. But yeah, the racism was real. When I went to Israel, I backpacked for 3 months there. And I wanted to understand, is there actually, like, how do Israelis see like different races? And I have to say, so the first part of my trip was mostly with secular people. It was Taglit, the birthright experience, and that I did it with secular Jews because I wanted to start experiencing something else. That was already the start. I wasn't really ready, if I'm being honest. I was still learning to fill in at the time. I was still like keeping Shabbat and kosher and everything. And like it was very difficult for me to be like to have thrown myself into such a secular environment. But it was very interesting talking to the Israelis. And then after my experience, like I would talk to everyone and like I'm talking to the cashiers, I'm talking to people on the bus, like random people. And what's interesting is all the secular Jews would literally tell me like they literally don't care. Like their lineage is mixed, like their mom is Moroccan and their dad is this or that, whatever. Everyone is mixed or don't care if you're mixed. That was the sentiment in the air. Like people are like Ethiopian or Tamani or European or whatever it is. Like people just don't care. They're very open in the secular world. But in the religious community, like when I would talk to the Haredim, it seemed like there was some beef. You know what I mean? And one other thing that somebody pointed out to me was like, when I asked them, like I was like, but in the secular Israel, people seem to be a lot more accepting of different Jews. So they were like, what about Israeli politics? Look at Israeli politics. What percentage of the people in politics are actually Sephardi or anything other than European Jewish? And I was like, I don't know anything about Israeli politics. So I'd love to hear your take on what you think about the secular versus religious world and like the acceptance of other types of Jews and people.
Yeah, we could definitely dive into that. To the point that you mentioned just now, I think again it's very interesting, I think, to notice, and I've never named this overtly, but I think it's a phenomena where the more conservative you are, the more concerned you are with this obsession with bloodline.
Mm,
We see this with the
mm.
Nazis, we see this with in fiction like Voldemort. Purity of
That's
blood.
interesting.
There's an interesting thing that lineage conservatism in general is a holding on to the past, and I think past and
Mm,
ancestry
yeah,
is linked. If my ancestor was an important guy, I now am
right,
important too because I'm linked to that past prestige. And
right.
it's a lot about hyping up a past that was better than today is a very
Mm,
conservative kind of way of thinking. And so I
interesting.
think we see a spectrum where Orthodox Jews are the most conservative and therefore more obsessed with are you descendant of a famous rabbi? Secular Jews in Israel are a lot more chill about that because they are more liberal, but might probably still be obsessed with are you Jewish or not, which is still an
Mm,
obsession
right.
with
Yeah.
lineage because there's still that fairly conservative culture throughout Judaism, throughout all Jews pretty much, especially in Israel, of, oh, you better marry a Jew. And it's like a given and stuff like that, especially in Israel. And then the more liberal you get, like in you walk around a street, it's racist to talk about insisting that your kids only marry us. Don't marry somebody from a Christian or Mexican or something like that. That's like almost frowned upon in the liberal world. It's like not a
Mm,
liberal mindset to insist that you
right.
keep the bloodline in the family. We see this in other conservative cultures. I know Iranians and I know a lot of people want
Yeah.
their kids to marry in, but I think that's still pretty conservative thinking. So I think we
Yeah,
see
that's
that
fascinating.
spectrum pretty far. And to that degree, I would argue that there's probably slightly more liberalism in Orthodox Jewish America than in Israeli Orthodox Judaism. There's still a level of dilution of the intensity, I argue, in
For
most
sure. For sure.
Orthodox Jewish upbringings
Yeah.
there. So with that, let's dive in right to the beginning of your kind of personal origin story. Like, where were you born? What kind of identity did your family, your parents have? Let's start there.
Yeah. Okay, so my parents themselves are like Baalei Tshuva. They were not religious and then they became religious, but their parents were more religious than them. Their parents were like traditional, let's say, and then they kind of became secular at one point, and then when they came to America, they became religious. Probably maybe more religious than their parents, but more just religious, not necessarily crazy about it, but practicing Jews. I was born and raised in Queens, New York, and I loved it. I had a very nice upbringing, I would say. I played Pokemon and stuff. There was a lot of cultural barrier between my parents and I, which was definitely tough. I think that ultimately probably led me to finding my own yeshiva and becoming more religious as I got older personally. But yeah, growing up in Queens, New York was honestly was a lot of fun. I had a lot of friends. It's completely changed. The community is very different than what it was when I grew up, and it kind of makes me sad. But yeah, eventually I went to high school in Chavetz Chaim, which is a very yeshivish kind of high school. I didn't really like it. I would constantly question the people in base medrash, but eventually and this is obviously a much deeper story, but I meet a rabbi in 12th grade who he just seemed very philosophical and thoughtful and everything. And then in my first year of yeshiva, that I decided to go to yeshiva for this reason, to just explore my Judaism. And that was really like where things escalate, where I really get into it and truly devote my life to it. Honestly, really devote my life to it. And honestly, I loved it. It was honestly not a bad experience. Like when I look back at it, I loved the Rebbeim there. I didn't think anyone was really malicious, but ultimately I think it was really misguided for me. But the way I grew up was, yeah, it was more traditional, and then I became very yeshivish.
So your parents are Bali Chua, meaning they became
Yeah.
religious later on in life, and you said that their parents in turn had been more religious than them or less?
Uzbekistan was at the time part of the USSR, so religion was it was dying. So their parents were more religious than them, and then, but always traditional. There was never any fanaticism. It was always just very, we do Shabbat, we do kosher. There was no like, as far as I understand, I'm sure there were probably maybe were individuals that were like obsessed with it, but people in general were just traditional.
So your parents were at the
Yeah.
tail end of religion losing its
Yeah.
potency, and then
Exactly.
they flipped at some point in their
Right.
adulthood and
When they came to America.
reignited their devotion
Yeah.
to it. Did they have a catalyst that kind of got them to become more religious?
Oh, yeah, my sister, I hope she doesn't mind me saying this, but my sister, I think she'll say it herself. She just bought into it. She got married at 19. Ultimately, that whatever. She ends up getting divorced years later, and she's really a very grounded and awesome person. I love my sister. She's a very thoughtful and wise person. But yeah, my sister pushed my parents to become religious, and that was before I was born because there's a big age gap between me and her.
So they're more religious. You're born into that. And despite that, you are even because there's this the nature of Bali Tshuva, people who become religious, they never fully get the whole thing. So you actually end up in your childhood being more religious than they are.
Yeah.
Okay. What did religion mean to your parents from the time that you enter their lives?
Okay, this is such a great question. What religion meant to my parents? I think my mom, I think she just wanted to be religious. That was maybe more of a cultural thing. Maybe there was like acceptance and community and love there. But I asked my dad why he became like why he's religious, and his answer, and I've never understood this. This is part of the cultural barrier. His answer was so simple. It was just like, "What do you mean, God?" And I'm telling you, for the longest time, I never understood it. And I didn't understand my parents because I think they were so simplistic in their understanding and belief. And I got it years later, where it's like, to my dad, God is an experience. And he's been through hell and back with running away from communist country and the bankruptcy. And they literally came with nothing. My dad was like a mechanical engineer, got his first job. It's a crazy and then American dream story. And to him, it's just God is with him always. And it's this is how you then do it. And they're not extreme people. They're really not. They're very traditional. They've never forced me to go to shul. We always ate kosher in the house. I honestly think if I would have eaten non kosher, I happen never to have, they probably wouldn't have ever said anything. When I finally told them that I wasn't religious, I thought there would be like a blowback because another thing about my dad is he's really economical, we'll call it. The man has, he's never spent $1 on himself. Literally, that's probably an exaggeration, but if he's hungry, he won't eat at a restaurant. You know what I mean? He just will save every penny. And he spent probably at least 100 grand, if not more, on my Yeshiva tuition. I thought he would be mad. He was so chill. He literally was like, just they didn't care. Like they just were completely accepting.
Okay, so
Yeah,
it's like an organic simplicity in their life that spirituality is there, but almost like that lack of intensity of or overcomplication, which I associate, if I could be racist for a second, with Ashkenazi overthinking,
yeah, right,
allowed them some elasticity for you to just be different and it's okay, right? Like
right. Yeah,
my parents are so highly invested in in the meaning of what it means to have religious kids that I'm just an extension of them. There's no
right.
differentiation and so on. But
Yeah,
so you're in this community, and again, like the most people in Queens, their parents were born religious and they come from a long lineage of it. Was it? Did you feel different, like in school, with any of that, or the
yeah.
gap between even you and your parents, because there was probably something there?
Yeah, exactly. So I always felt different. A lot of that is I have ADHD and dyslexia, and I'm just an extremely curious person and outgoing. I've always felt different. This is a funny anecdote that I'm sure will come up. I went to almost like a off the Jarach meetup group kind of thing. And the first thing that really slapped me that I noticed was like all of us are like, we're all different. You know what I mean? Like all of us. But yeah, I think even in elementary school, I went to a Bukharian school, but I felt very different from the other kids. And then when I went to high school, definitely it was like there was a big culture shock between I think a lot of the Ashkenaz kids to me. It was a small minority. It felt very different. And I think the obsession with what you were talking about on your points earlier, like the obsession with the meaning behind it and making sure your kids do it and all that. I think a lot of it is also it's Western. It's so like we over intellectualize. I see these debates about God and stuff, and I'm just like, I don't. If God is real or not, it's irrelevant unless it's making a difference in your own life. Who cares if you have all the theory in the world? Just the perfect example is people are like, oh, do you accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior? This is literally, I'm telling you, who cares if Jesus is the Lord and Savior? If in your life you experience saving because of you believe that Jesus is your Lord and Savior, then that's amazing. And if you don't, then who cares if Jesus is actually the Savior? You're not being saved. What does it matter if you have all the intellectual whatever? It's garbage. It's meaningless. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, long rant.
No, I like it. It's
Right,
basically highly subjective, which is what I've basically converted to
right,
after 27 years of being all objective and having the absolute truth and stuff. It's like the only thing that really exists is our subjective experience of the world. And if
right.
your subjective experience of the world can be whatever it is, if it works for you and it doesn't harm other people, that's the key word here
Right.
because a lot of
Yeah.
religion
So
does,
key. Right.
then do whatever you want. You could believe you're a fairy. I don't care. And
Yeah.
if not, don't impose it on other people. And like you said, the abstract idea of it, like making a statement, like just the verbiage, which is so common amongst religious people, like it either works for you or it doesn't, and just go with that.
Right.
So much of it
Yeah.
is forcing emotions and stuff. I want to hear more about. It's interesting that there was enough of a Bukharian community that there was actually an elementary school
Oh
like
yeah.
that, and then high school already you mix and match a little bit more.
Yeah.
One last broad question for you around that age. At that time, was religion working for you? I understood from you that it was. So
Yeah.
this, if you will, the
Yeah.
ADHD and the dyslexia, which is
Right.
oftentimes a big challenge for people,
For sure.
it was working for you overall or not?
So I would say yes, it was. I remember I don't know how old I was, somewhere between 8 to 10, and I told my parents, like I asked my brother actually, I was like, how do you know that God is real? Like, how do you know that this Torah is like actually like God wants you to do it? And he was like, I don't know. So we go to my parents, and then I asked my parents, and my parents are like, I don't know. Let's call this brother-in-law, the one that's the rabbi. Let's call him and ask him. And it's so funny. So it's like we call him and we ask him, and he's, and he tells me, he's like, Gabi, what we people that ask these kinds of questions, we call them an apikores. And he said it with like such excitement. And I thought it was like a good thing. I thought he was going to say I'm some type of hidden genius or something. Yeah, but he basically told me like, oh, we don't really ask questions like that, was basically his response. But it was funny. Now I guess I wear it with a badge of honor because I'm definitely an apikores now.
Exactly. A heretic.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. A
exactly.
heretic, that's what
Yeah,
Apicurus means. But yeah, I guess it was working for me in the sense that like I liked the community. I liked my upbringing. I loved the holidays. Hanukkah was awesome. Purim was awesome. Like the Sukkot. I loved everything. All the holidays were awesome. But I guess like my intellectual side was not being like the part of me that wanted to understand it was not really being stimulated. And that really, I guess, was like the driver for my later ascension or whatever.
exactly. So you
Yeah.
eventually the philosophical parts didn't really
Yeah.
align, but on a day to day, like it sounds to me like you didn't find the laws that oppressive. Again, sound hearing like the kind of family that you were raised in, it sounds like they were pretty chill. It wasn't like I'm going to hell if I don't put on tefillin today. That wasn't the framing.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely not. When I was in high school, I wouldn't wear tefillin on off days. I would only wear tefillin in high school. And my parents, they just never, they didn't care.
And it makes sense that therefore overall your experience of those years was okay. What was it like for you to be non-Ashkenazi, for lack of a better term, to be Asian, if you will,
Yeah.
in a yeshiva,
Yeah.
right? What was that like?
In high school, there's a lot of racism. I think this is the thing. An adult, and I have experienced racism from adults, which is horrible when it does happen. But I think most adults, and especially as time went on, like I think it's becoming more and more as the older people retire, and then you have the younger people. Like there's more of a acceptance of minority cultures, and I think like even one Rebbe that I'm like thinking of in my mind. When I was in ninth grade, they have said like overtly racist things to me. Oh, don't be like Bukharian sleazy, like things like that. Things that are like are completely unacceptable. What do you mean by that? What's that supposed to mean? Like I would get caught for like plagiarism just because I'm Bukharian. I'm telling you, so many other kids like plagiarized or whatever, but their father is the Rebbe here, their uncle is that. Nobody would accuse that, and then like I would just get accused with no evidence, no nothing. And look, I did plagiarize in all fairness, but like that wasn't the reason that they caught me. You know what I mean? Like that. Let's be real. So there were definitely things like that. Like I think this was the first time in my life also that I was like my whole upbringing, like in elementary school, I was always like the good kid. I was always like all the teachers loved me and just this friendly, kind kid. But then this was like the first time I'm thrown into this environment where like suddenly people are like, oh, he's like a troublemaker. He's not, and for no reason, like literally for no reason. So the implicit racism that I experienced as being like one of the only Bukharian kids, and me and my Bukharian friends also, that made us click fast. We became like a crew very fast, partly because of that. But yeah, from ninth grade, there was definitely more racism. By the time I get to 12th grade, this Rebbe really changed a lot. But yeah, there was definitely some racism outwardly from the kids, not so much outwardly from the teachers and principals, but like implicit
Yeah,
stuff like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Mostly it was friendly and I got along great. And I have my best friends to this day that are Ashkenaz, and the ones that I'm very close with were awesome. And they were never racist to me and always were nice. But I don't want to make it sound like there was a lot of racism, but it wasn't like everywhere, and it just wasn't nowhere either.
I think that speaks to that point. I'm not an expert on racism at all, but I know that you could think of racism as like the police pulling you over all the time and ending up in jail more frequently. That's
Yeah.
one extreme, which like
Yes.
Or if you look Arab in Israel, then the police harass you nonstop. There's that level of racism that we
Right.
see, and then there's the more subtle generalizing over entire types Ashkenazi Jews do amongst themselves with Hungarians being miserly or being sticklers for like their appearance. But I remember as a kid we were overtly racist. It was out of control as far as the Palestinian Arabs and stuff like that,
Mhm.
Palestinians and Arabs around us. That we call them Arabs. I believe they're Palestinians is a more accurate term. The same thing goes for, but in school again, and we did have some Sephardi kids, but we were very much Ashkenazi prominent, and for sure. There was no distinction. You were like Sephardi or Ashkenazi, that was it. And then we would throw certain sub ethnicities on the bus. Like Moroccans were famous for being hot tempered, and we were
Mm.
just constantly throwing that around as an insult to each other. Don't be so Moroccan, right? And then the Kurds
Oh,
were
really?
stupid,
Interesting.
the
Okay.
Moroccans were hot-headed, and the
The stereotype is that the Persians are misers.
and then again, like when you're on the receiving end of that, right? It puts you in a certain corner, and it sounds to me like yeah, you bond with the people who are like-minded. I'm assuming the experience of your friends who are also Bukharian
Yeah.
was similar, right? You guys could like, compare notes to
Yeah,
what's going on
absolutely.
here.
For sure. I'll be even more honest, and this will get me canceled one day for sure. But like we viewed ourselves as like we were minorities. We used to use the N word in the kind of like the cool way amongst each other. He's my N word like that. And like I guess like nowadays it would definitely be wrong, but there were comedians like Russell Peters that would encourage things like that or say stuff like that, and like we identified with it. That was who how we saw ourselves in the school as like this is what we were.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
internalized racism in a way. I don't know if you saw yourself as
yeah.
inferior necessarily,
Dude,
but like you take the notes.
I would say, especially in ninth grade, I think there was much more internalized racism until I woke up to it a lot more. My whole life, I'd been like a good kid, always a good, you know what I mean? And then like to go to a school where all of a sudden like you're not being given that like benefit of the doubt, not being seen for who you are. It was nuts. It was like literally, you know how they say, oh, a black kid could just be walking and get stopped by the police for no reason. It was literally, that was what it was like. It was like literally like that in the
Yeah,
school, like feeling like you could just get in trouble for no reason, like just walking around like principal checks on you. Why are you checking on
why
me?
check on me specifically?
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
right.
For sure. Okay. Yeah. So I appreciate that kind of like that backdrop of it all. And so then you said, come 12th grade, you have this particularly influential rabbi, and this
Yeah.
rabbi inspires you to go, I believe, study in Israel. Was that where you ended up going?
So, okay, I originally was gonna go study in Israel, and then I decided not to because of this rabbi who he was starting a yeshiva in Kew Gardens, like in Queens also. So I ended up not going to Israel to go to this yeshiva because he basically this was the idea. Rabbi Kramer, I actually still love him. He's an awesome rabbi. I haven't really even told him. This might honestly be how he finds out that I'm not religious. I haven't told him, but amazing. Probably maybe honestly the most brilliant person I've ever met, and charismatic and caring and smart and thoughtful. And we would literally talk about, is Judaism true? Judaism versus Chabad, like meaning our this version of Judaism versus different Hasid, like different versions of Judaism versus Christianity versus atheism. We would talk for hours. We would literally have long conversations where we would talk. And he was brilliant. And he was starting yeshiva for Sephardim, like for Bukharians and the greater Sephardi community. And that me being like one of the first students in the school was really appealing. And this person was inspirational. I wanted to learn under him. And I don't regret it. Honestly, I had a good experience there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so a couple things come up for me even just around
sure.
that, and I'm also making a note to share with you an interesting yeshiva story with racism of my from my time in yeshiva. So we'll talk about that later. But interesting enough, the first thing that jumped to my mind, Rabbi Kramer, he sounds like he was Ashkenazi. What's it
Yeah.
like for an Ashkenazi rabbi to open an all Sephardi yeshiva? What are the implications of that? And I know I sound
Yeah.
so left leaning, and I don't like that, but
Yeah.
is an aspect of it either. Like I don't believe it needs to be so linear. But what was
Right.
that like?
He did it. It was in partnership with a Bukharian high school. The Bukharian high school wanted to start a base madrash, and he joined it. He was the Rosh Yeshiva. I think what disturbs me a little bit now is, let's say there's this yeshiva Tiferet Moshe in Kew Garden Hills in Queens, where I'm sorry, in Kew Gardens in Queens, and basically half the student body is Bukharian. They don't have, as far as I know, maybe they've updated their staff, but they don't have one Bukharian staff like Rebbe or Menahel there, and 50% of their student body is Bukharian. To me, that is a really big red flag. That's really disturbing when that happens. So I don't get it. The school did hire, like this yeshiva, they did have other Sephardi staff. But here's what I'll say about that, because it's such a good question. When it comes to a medrash, like the way that Ashkenazim do it, it is a foreign concept to like Mizrahi Sephardi people. There's no such thing as a Bukharian base medrash. It never existed. It base medrash as an institution, like yeshiva as an institution, meaning learning full time post high school as like this cultural normal thing. It started in Europe, I think by the Gra. I don't know exactly when, maybe the late 1700s or something like that. It was an invention. It didn't exist in these other places. The idea of there being like a Bukharian Rosh Yeshiva, I think there just wasn't, there wouldn't have been anyone really capable of doing it. You know what I mean? And he was so qualified. And we've adopted him since. We consider Rabbi Kramer Bukharian. There's a joke he's Rabbi Kramer of, but we love him.
Yeah.
He's great.
I sometimes forget that how much the yeshiva system, the concept of having a post high school concept where people just study for years and years is a completely European phenomena that Jews from the rest of the world did not see the need for
No.
it or did not engage in it. I wanted to pause because I find, lest this be perceived as a podcast where I only knock religion. First of all, a couple weeks ago, I interviewed Flatbush Girl, actually,
Oh,
and
yeah,
she
yeah,
was
yeah.
still Orthodox, right? And I will hear all voices, especially on here. Suffice to say, it sounds to me like if the entire Orthodox Jewish world was more like Rabbi Kramer, we'd be in a much better place. And I wanted to therefore pause and have you maybe enumerate more further. What is it about? What did he embody that you wish you saw more frequently in the Orthodox Jewish world?
So there's another person, Rabbi Samuel Lemon. He knows I told him I'm not religious, and we still had a morning like learning session like for a year after I've told him I'm not religious, just to be able to spend time with him. Like he was so awesome. But the question you asked is like, what did he embody? Every day when Rabbi Kramer would come into the yeshiva, he would clap his hands like, let's learn. Like he made us feel like we're living full, purposeful, awesome lives. And like what we're doing is like really awesome and amazing. And to me, like that contrast from what Rabbi Kramer was represented to like my parents, that was exactly like what I was looking for. I was looking for like this person that was driven by meaning and purpose and understanding and can articulate it and would answer your questions and spend time with you. And it felt like they had purpose. Like also not to knock on my parents so much, but when I would come home after school, right? Like my parents, like, I don't know, they would just sit down, watch TV, eat. Like Rabbi Kramer was the exact opposite of that. And Rabbi Sammy Lemon was hilarious, also brilliant, very smart guy. And he was so funny, he's so personable and everything. Like they exude purpose, they exude happiness and joy of life. And like I think they were also so non-judgmental, honestly. And that's what I really like, I guess, resonated with. Yeah, definitely. I think more people, if they were like them, like the Jewish world would be a better place. And it's tough, right? Like I think Judaism, the religious, let's say the Orthodox world, it's so embedded with mental illnesses in the form of like anxiety and OCD and depression and just all sorts of like issues and intergenerational trauma that like it gets fused into the religion for so many people. And it's like these Reb Sammy and Rabbi Kramer, like they just didn't have that. I don't know why, but they were just so awesome.
So the starting point was they were well-adjusted people, and we build
Just
off of that essentially. Cool. I would love to dive more into the mental health when we get towards the end of the arc and
yeah,
we go big picture. We'll go
sure.
into that part. So yeah, like you reach this arc, which a lot of people reach, which is it's like the point in the movie. There's a cool phenomena. I've never spoken about this on a podcast. There's a really cool book called Skin the Cat. Skin the Cat? Save the Cat. Save the Cat. It's about the art of script writing and how all films have predefined structures. Regardless of what the story is about, there's still like an arc that's always the same.
Mhm.
And I find that almost everybody on this podcast who has left religion typically goes through an arc where they are extra devoted, where
Right,
they really dive all the way in and they really give it a solid shot.
right.
Sometimes it's a couple of years, sometimes it's a significant amount of time. And it sounds like this was like that for you. Was it in this point still that you started dating, or was there always some amount of not being religious and maybe that trip to Israel that happened before that?
Okay, this arc, like I graduated at 17. I go to this yeshiva I was there for 2 years. There's stuff to talk about here for sure still. And then I go to this yeshiva in St. Louis for a year. And then I went to Chavetz Chaim in Queens, which is like the main yeshiva. It's the biggest yeshiva in Queens, Chavetz Chaim. It's known for its Ian and it's known for its Musar. Ian is like learning Talmud, like very in depth. Like literally, you could spend a month on one line of the Talmud, just like studying different. First of all, you do the line, you do all the different commentaries on it, and then you guys people argue about it and stuff. So honestly, I enjoyed it. I actually still miss Ian in a sense. I wish there was like I could sit down with a friend and we'll read like Spinoza and treat it like how we did in yeshiva. What's Spinoza trying to solve by this line? What's he doing? Can we test this? I miss that aspect in yeshiva. It's truly unique. And honestly, for me, with learning disabilities, getting through school without ever really even like barely being able to read, honestly. Reading was an extreme challenge. I never read a book in school. And then like the ADHD, barely ever paying attention, like having to like literally just get 65s on just like dumb luck. I think I really credit Yeshiva for teaching me how to use my brain. And so I'm really grateful for that. I think like my life has transformed in a good way thanks to being able to learn. And then look, it's had its challenges too, don't get me wrong. But and then with Musser being like self-improvement kind of thing, philosophy, whatever. Sorry, what was your question? I got
No, all good. This is perfect. My question was for you, did the cracks beginning to show
right,
of you leaving religion, and we don't have to jump ahead,
right.
but I was curious about the timeline because you said
One,
you had
yeah,
more to share specifically about your yeshiva
yes,
era. So we can definitely
yeah,
talk
yeah,
about that
yeah.
first.
I started dating at 23. So this is like from 17 to 23, things were relatively fine. But when I was in my second year of that yeshiva and close to turning 19, it was like around October time, I masturbated for the last time. And I basically completely quit it. I had that streak going for basically 5 years where I did not masturbate and I didn't watch porn also for longer than that even. So that was a big deal because that actually truly becomes a disaster when I start dating. But I think this is a huge issue. I think like a lot of yeshiva guys or anybody in this purity culture, like there's this idea of, oh, you have to really guard your eyes or whatever. And it becomes obsessive. It becomes obsessive and it becomes unhealthy. I don't know if I'm articulating this point well, but a woman could dress how a woman ordinarily dresses and it's not a big deal. You know what I mean? And, but when you're obsessed, when you're like, oh my God, this is wrong or no, you can't have attraction for women, it's dehumanizing because sexual attraction is totally normal. You should be allowed to have it. And again, I'm not going to say that anybody in yeshiva per se told me I should do this. I think it was very much motivated by myself. Masturbation's a sin or porn is a sin. It wasn't preached, but it was like known that it's a sin and you're not supposed to do it. And nobody necessarily told me like, Gabi, you need to stop masturbating or watching porn. But it was a message that I just internalized and decided to take on. But I think ultimately it was damaging. I think.
Mm. So it was
Yeah,
actually damaging to have that amount of abstinence.
I think so. Yeah.
What was the damage?
I ended up having this crush on this girl. And this was, let's say, a family friend. And I was obsessed with this person. I could not get over it. And I didn't, the only interactions we had was I would be at the Shabbos table and she would be there. And then maybe we would exchange a few lines to each other, maybe. And I became completely obsessed, completely fucking obsessed. And I could not get over it. I just could not. And I tried to talk to Rebbe about it. Rebbe said, oh, you stop seeing her. Don't go to that house anymore. And I did. I stopped going to that house. And that made it worse. It made it worse because I had absolutely no sexual outlets. It was not allowed. And we exchanged a couple of lines on the Shabbos table. I know what she looks like or whatever. She was a real person, but now she became a complete fucking fantasy. And I was obsessed and I could not get over it. And this led to so much misery and pain in my life. And once I actually started leaving the religion and I was going to the bars and on the apps, I finally got over this girl because it was like, it was no longer, this is the only sexual outlet I had. And it wasn't even sexual. It was just purely mental. But yeah, it was damaging. It ruined my life, honestly. If I had to say it caused, I went through one really bad depressive episode. It was all about this. I was obsessed with this person and I could not get over it.
That's fascinating. I would argue that it is still sexual. It's just that it was the
Right.
mind sexualizing in this loop where it had absolutely
Right.
no outlet, and so it becomes a sort of like compulsion almost, right? Because it's like a
Exactly. Exactly.
completely unmet need.
Completely unmet need. That's probably a better way to put it because it was like, I didn't fantasize about this person sexually. I fantasized, I want to get married. I want to marry this person. It was like a very Disney-esque fantasy, but it was still just so harmful and toxic.
And that's true, right? Because sexuality is not completely inextricably, but closely linked at the very least with intimacy, right? And if
Right.
you are in an Orthodox Jewish environment, there's a huge absence of intimacy broadly, depending on how your parents are. Certainly, in my case, it was. And then there's no contact with women. Men are generally not very intimate with each other at all. Like it's highly discouraged, and so you end up in this vacuum, right? And this idea of intimacy or marriage or sex, it becomes completely overblown in it it gets completely, it becomes an entire castle in the air kind of thing, right? Which
Right.
is part of
Right.
it.
No problem. You can take a second
Yeah.
to fix it if you need to.
Let's turn it off and turn it on again. See, there we go. Okay. Yeah. How long does it go on for? Yeah.
The so I would say the crush probably started around like when I was like 21 and I didn't get over it until 24, 25, like 3 years, something years. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a crazy amount of time.
I look back at that and I feel so bad for myself. And people would say at the time, like even when I would talk to friends about it, and I would just be like, I literally fucking can't. I wish I could. I wish I can't. And I was so obsessed. And what finally got me to get over it was when I was like finally leaving the religion and finding other, I think up until my second year in Queens. So like the first 4 years when I was in yeshiva, it was beautiful. It was a come up. It was like I loved it. It was a good experience. Like I didn't really have anything to complain about. There was no racism whatsoever, like from the rabbis and base medrash, which was great. I had a good experience and I loved it. It taught me how to think. It gave me purpose and drive. And honestly, I don't even regret it because like the way I see it almost is like imagine you were learning like kung fu or like MMA or something, right? And the best way to learn it is if you dedicate your life to this thing for 4 years, you will learn. And imagine, and if you really believe it, you will get it even better. You know what I mean? If you so that's almost like how I view it. I had a good experience with learning. I think it taught me so much about like myself and spirituality and how I relate to other people and like purpose in life. And like it was a good experience. But then once I get to that second year in yeshiva, I start my master's degree thinking I was going to become a rabbi. I was going to get smicha. So to get smicha in Chavetz Chaim, it's like a 10-year track. I got my undergrad from the yeshiva, which was great too. I did not waste any time because like they gave me a degree and I was able to use that to get my master's. A
Your
degree
degree in
well
one
earned.
year, 1 year of yeshiva study, right?
After
But
4 years in
how?
yeshiva, they gave me a degree.
But you had already. Oh, so 4 years in Chafetz Chaim. Okay.
Oh, because the yeshiva that I went to, this first yeshiva, it was a Chavetz Chaim. There's this one Sephardi Chavetz Chaim in Kew Gardens that they wanted to add a base medrash, a Sephardi base medrash for the Chavetz Chaim style. So it was all part of the same rabbinical seminary of America, is like the umbrella name of their Chavetz Chaim corporation, whatever. So they can give college credits if you're there for 4 years. I had to take a couple of club courses also to get some other requirements. But I took some courses on the side and I was able to get my degree after 4 years, which was awesome. So I didn't really waste any time. It was like I got my degree and it was a cool experience. I don't regret it. But after that, when dating started to come into the picture a little bit, then it was like, then it's like you start to experience some racism. You start to see some other sides to it. Because until that point, you're really secluded.
You're not rubbing up much against any outside world. It's like you're in the four
Right.
walls of this study institution, and
Exactly.
if everything is good
Exactly.
in those four walls, you're great.
And this leads to somewhat toxic cultures also in the sense like you have this like I think in America like particularly like you have almost like sometimes there are these like right-wing yeshiva guys that like they're like in their dorm, they're totally secluded amongst guys and they're just watching Ben Shapiro fucking all day, you know what I mean? And they're like it's bizarre. It's bizarre. You have these like yeshiva guys that have no life experience, no real world knowledge, like saying stupid political opinions that they've never gotten a real job in their life. You know what I mean? They're talking about like taxes and women's rights and this bullshit. Like you don't even know any women. You live in a yeshiva. You know what I mean? Yeah,
It's the
it's not.
equivalent of a basement dweller minus the basement, right? They just
Dude,
yeshiva
yes,
dwellers.
yes, yes.
Yeshiva
Yeah.
dwellers. We coined it here first, Gabi. You say
Right.
yeshiva dweller.
That's a great name for it. Yeah, it happens. And why don't these people just leave fucking yeshiva and get a job? And it's because there's such cultural pressure in some of these communities to stay in yeshiva, or you're not going to get a shidduch, or you're not going to. And it's like there's so much cultural pressure to stay in the system that is not working for so many people and is in fact hurting so many people. You know what I mean? Because of this pressure. And it's like the yeshiva could do without it and it doesn't need the pressure. The culture does. People would be better off if you want to go to yeshiva, you're not forced to go. You know what I mean? That would be better. And the yeshiva will outwardly say that, but the community, the vibe in the community is not that. You know?
And
Yeah.
Israel's even worse because there's the whole
Right.
military thing squeezing people into yeshivas as the only
Dude.
option. So
Exactly.
yeah, and I remember I was just rereading parts of my memoir. My first encounter with that kind of yeshiva guy only began at 17. I went to a really serious yeshiva for 12 years straight, pretty much. And suddenly I encountered these bums who were just sitting around all day making coffee. And I was shocked. I was like, I
Yeah.
didn't even know these people existed. And I certainly didn't want to have anything to do with them because take it seriously or don't be here. Why are you breathing the same air that I am if you're not gonna do the job of a
Dude.
yeshiva guy properly?
And this ties me in to when I finally had to leave yeshiva, when I left Chavetz Chaim. This was halfway through that my second year in Chavetz Chaim in Queens. So
Yeah,
it's a little bit complicated if you're not familiar with the yeshiva, but meaning this is my fifth year in yeshiva altogether, my
perfect.
second year in the main yeshiva. Halfway through, I did my master's, and this is also actually another good thing about Chavetz Chaim. They let you do college while you're there. You could take 2 nights off a week, which is not enough time, but at least they allow college, which is a really nice thing that they do because other yeshivas do not even allow any sort of college.
Yeah, that makes them progressive and on the modern Orthodox spectrum,
Right.
maybe.
They're
Yeah,
so not modern. It's so yeshivish. Their philosophy was always let guys do college if they need to do college or whatever, which is great. So I'm doing my master's. It's completely overwhelming because I need to take off all nights. I can't do just 2 nights a week. I'm doing a full a full semester. It was intense and I couldn't handle it. And I needed to leave the yeshiva. And I sat down with a Rabbi Wiener, who I really respected, a much older rabbi. And I was He was my main Rebbe the year before. And I was talking to him and he was like, Gabi, if you have to leave yeshiva, just leave yeshiva. And I broke down crying. I felt like a complete failure. And he tells me, he's like, Gabi, why are you crying? And I was just like, I had so many dreams and aspirations. I wanted to be a rabbi. I wanted to do kiruv, which was also actually another thing. I used to do a lot of kiruv too. I don't have anything against Ura. I actually love Ura, but I used to do kiruv for them. And it was like, I used to run Chill Zone in Queens. And that was another thing. And Chill Zone is a great program. We helped lots of kids in the community. That would be like pizza and connection. And that's always how I saw it. For me, I was so passionate about it. And I did so much kiruv and so much involvement because I truly loved what I was doing and where I was. I had all these dreams and aspirations to go and do that. And then here I was like feeling like a complete failure. And we could talk about the kiruv too and how I feel about it, because I guess it is a little bit complicated. But yeah, it was so sad. To me, all my whole experience with kiruv was like bringing people closer to God, to your purpose in life, your meaning in life. This outside world could feel so empty and lonely sometimes. And here's connect. And it was beautiful. It was awesome. And I was so good at it also. And it was like, it was sad. It was sad. Yeah. As I reflect on that. But yeah, I completely broke down.
Did I find like I find it telling how committed you were, right? That's like the first thing that comes up to me immediately. I guess two follow-up questions. One is very technical. Is were you not able to just skip out every evening and still be in yeshiva during the day? Yeah,
Yeah.
let me start with that. What
No,
do you
that's
have
a
to do
good
with
question.
facility?
You could do it if there's like a don't ask, don't tell kind of thing. There's a mashgiach in the yeshiva, Rabbi Feinberg, who's it's officially a part of his job to make sure people are on schedule and stuff. So if once the mashgiach finds out, then you're screwed, because then it's like you can't really get away with it. But until the mashgiach finds out, you can get away with it. But he's gonna find out eventually,
You would
and
think
then
that the yeshiva would say, "Here's somebody who's so committed. We'll let him come to 10 hours instead of 14,
right.
and it would be great."
Yeah.
But apparently that was just not feasible.
Yeah, it is. What would be probably is they would let you probably come to the shiurim and learn there. They're not going to kick you out of learning or going to shiur. You could get permission to go to shiur, and there are people that do that, but they're probably not going to let you dorm or get the food. And this is another thing I have to say. Yeshiva gave me basically a full scholarship. It was a full scholar. Like I didn't have to pay. It was awesome. I did not feel exploited. I did collect during their raffles and stuff, but to me it was like they're giving me a full scholarship. I never collected enough to pay the rent on my bed and the dinners and the lunches and food that I would eat. And it was like I was basically there for free. It was awesome. Meaning if you were going to be in the dorm and be like a part of the yeshiva, then they would want you to be full time. If you're not going to be able to be a part of the program, then it's okay. If you rent an apartment, you could come and learn. They're not going to kick anyone out. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I hear. So you're no longer part of the official thing. Now, as far as Jewish outreach to Kiruv that you were doing, you felt like you couldn't continue doing it if you weren't part of a yeshiva kind of line to becoming rabbi?
So I did continue it for a bit. Queen's Chill Zone. I love Ura and everything. I felt compelled to run Chill Zone because I was like one of the only Queens guys that would be able to be there. And most of the other staff members would come from Brooklyn and stuff. And I'm just like, where are the Queens people supporting our own community? Where are the Bukharians supporting our own community? Like, why aren't we here supporting our own community? And that's something that I'm really passionate about. I started a WhatsApp group. It's not huge, but just the Bukharian therapists. And what bothers me is like when you have like other therapists coming in from different communities talk about mental health in the Bukharian community. I'm like, why is this organization paying some random therapist from Brooklyn that's not Bukharian, that doesn't know anything about the Bukharian struggles, to talk to Bukharians about mental health? We have lots of therapists that you could ask. Come on. It does piss me off a little bit, but I felt very compelled to do the Kiruv in Queens for that reason. I felt like this is my community. I should be here doing something and standing up. I loved it. And I did continue it afterwards for a bit. Really, when I stopped running it, this was in contradiction with my religious struggles that came later, that I was like, I'm just not the right person to be doing this anymore. I still think it's a great organization. I don't have regrets for what it was. It gave people and something to do on Saturday nights. Lots of kids, teens would come Saturday night. There's pizza and it's fun and it's connection and there's mentorship, and it was a great program. Honestly, it was awesome. Like there's no regrets for doing it, but I think Kiruv in itself, like what you've described from what you've experienced, where it like there's a pipeline and like it's not just connecting you to a closer religion. Then there's like kind of expectations, and then you come into the community, and then you're giving your money, and then this and that, and it becomes like a whole cult. Whatever. The line between cult and Orthodox religion is becoming thinner and thinner, and it's like that's also why I feel the need to speak a little bit, because I'm also seeing it affect my community in the sense that like we talk about assimilation, we talk about, oh my god, assimilation is so real, people are intermarrying and stuff. But it's like I look at the Bukharian community and I'm like, yeah, sure, lots of people are becoming secular and they're intermarrying. That's happening for sure. But what about the people that are just completely dissolving into the Ashkenaz community? It's like they're not really Bukharian either. They've assimilated too, just to a different culture. You know what I mean? And that's good assimilation, and then this is bad. Like whatever. Like people are people. Let people make their own decisions. But if I could share the story, this
Yeah.
is really like the kicker of the assimilation that I'm talking about, of the becoming more religious. My wife is a teacher, and it's been hard on her. I really feel bad for her because we've not been religious, and she's in this ultra Orthodox yeshiva as a teacher, and she's had to wear a wig and wear sneeze clothing in the summer and everything, and it's been tough on her. But like in this yeshiva, she's a second grade teacher. It's a Bukharian yeshiva, right? Religious Bukharian yeshiva. They were reading The Magic Treehouse. I've never read The Magic Treehouse. I don't know what's in it, but it's a children's book. The school and the kids, this is crazy. Second grade kids, they loved the book. They would read it. They loved it. The school took away the books because of the magic in it or whatever. They took away the books from the kids. Do you know how hard it is to get a second grader to read and enjoy reading? And you give them something that they actually enjoy and they're into it, and the school takes it away. And for weeks, there was no replacement for them. And then, like, my wife told me they replaced it with, and I've never read this book either, so I don't know if it's any good, but The Silly World of Kelm or something like that. They replaced it, which is, and my wife is like, the quality is way worse.
Yeah, that Magic Treehouse series, I believe, actually transports these kids to different historical places, and you learn a ton of history from the perspective
Wow.
of two kids going on adventures. It's actually a really great educational series.
What shocks me though about this, what shocks me is that this is a Bukharian school. And this is actually funny. I had the opportunity to talk to one of the parents at one point, and I wanted to just ask them. I was like, there's no way Bukharian parents are like, yeah, take away the magic treehouse from the kids. There's no way they're okay with this. So I asked one of the parents, and they were like, they were actually shocked. They were like, I didn't know that they did that. I don't see anything wrong with magic treehouse. I can't believe they did that. But I'm just like, it's messed up. Why are you making a Bukharian school a fanatic place? This isn't our culture. You know what I mean? This is messed up. It is messed up to do this. It's screwed up. In my mind, it's not really child abuse, but it's almost getting there. It's almost like intentionally taking away an education from them that leaves people really dependent and really close-minded and trapped in a worldview that they don't, it's pseudo abusive.
I believe that access to quality education is a human right. So
Right. Yeah.
you're defying a basic human right when you deprive
Right.
children of fair education. And what I hear you saying is that basically, as we can see from your parents' culture, Bukharian culture is you strong Jewish identity, but you can be not a fanatic about it. And then Ashkenazi Jewish, which runs the schools, is
Yeah.
far more fanatic and they're taking over. So there is assimilation, just in the wrong direction. Right. And
Yeah.
it's
Exactly.
assimilation
Right.
into fanaticism, is what I hear you saying.
Dude, and I'm seeing it.
Yeah.
And Rabbi Mizrahi also, oh my gosh, he's infected the Bukharian community. Look, this is the thing also. I don't want to take away meaning that people find from listening to Rabbi Mizrahi. He could be extreme, sure. If you find meaning, I don't necessarily want to take that away, but it's extreme. It's not right. And it's really affecting a lot of people in the community that become fanatic because of that. It causes
Yeah,
problems.
I hear that.
Yeah.
So back to your personal story, you're forced to leave yeshiva because you have to get this master's degree. There's a period where you still stay involved in outreach, but like you're not going to be that rabbi dream that maybe part of you dreamt of being. So
Yeah.
what happens next?
Okay, so what happens next is I join this like part-time yeshiva at the same time. So that was more of like that just mornings that you were talking about, which was great. I had a good time there. But that they had, and this is where I feel feel bad saying this, but they had a lot of bums there.
Yeah,
A lot of yeshiva dwellers there. And at this point, like I'm there for the second half of that year, right? So this is my still my fifth year in yeshiva, right? The second half of my fifth year, that's where I'm there. And then in my sixth year, I start the year there. Anyway, so shortly after that, I stay with the yeshiva and then I start dating once the world opens up. And that's when stuff really smacks me in the face. I think like at that point, once I finally left yeshiva and I was with these yeshiva dwellers doing my master's, I started like waking up almost. It was like the first time where after those 5 years, I was in a very strict yeshiva environment. I didn't really have any outside exposure. Finally, I started having the internet again, especially with college. And I was depressed because of this crush. I started watching TV, like comedies, just literally to help me take the edge off of it. But in general, just from leaving the yeshiva environment, I start waking up from my haze of what was going on. COVID happens, and again, I'm waking up from my haze. And this is actually a very important detail I didn't necessarily mention. I think when I was in that first year with that Rabbi Kramer, when I was in my first year of yeshiva, and we would talk for hours and hours about what is Judaism even real? How do I know I should believe it? This, I would also watch tons of debates, like Richard Dawkins and like all these people, all sorts of debates, watching other religions and stuff. I wanted to get a good sense at that time. And basically, at the end of that year, I was like, I had this epiphany almost where I was like, look, I don't know. I've spent this year really trying to figure it out. I don't know. And I don't know if I'm ever going to know. You know what I mean? But what I do know, this is what I'll say for sure, is that I see Rabbi Kramer and I see Rabbi Sammy Lemon, and I'm like, these people are fucking awesome. These people live a life I am envious of. I want to live this life. They are married, they have kids, they're doing well, they live purposefully, they're happy, they're strong in they have integrity, they are like community leaders. They are people that I wanted to emulate and live my life. And I was like, look, I don't know what's real or what's not real, but what I know is that I want to live a good life. And I see that these people are living a good life. And I'm like, this path is here in front of me. I could take this path. So let me just dive in. Let me just do it. I have enough where I'm like, I could be intellectually honest with myself and believe that Judaism is true. And I could defend that position. Do I know with 1,000,000% certainty? No. But I don't know how long it's going to take for me to get there, if I ever will. But what I do know is that I want to live a good life. Anyways, so we fast forward 5 years and I'm depressed. I'm obsessed with this girl. I finally start dating and I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to just tell this girl that I want to date her. I'm going to finally confess. At this point, I haven't seen this person for like a year or two. It's just comical, honestly. But anyways, I have no regret. Honestly, this was like such a big deal then. And it's still like I get these feelings when I'm like talking about it. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to go talk to her. And I arranged like actually like a meeting and we like chat for 20 to 30 minutes. And I tell her like what's going on. Anyways, long story short, she basically says she doesn't want to date me. And I was crushed. She didn't say like she didn't want to date me. She did mean that she didn't want to date me, but she was being nice. She basically said like at this time she doesn't want to start dating and she doesn't want to date basically. So yeah, basically I was crushed, but I took it as, oh, maybe there's like, if she changes her mind, we'll like date or something. Anyway, so then I try dating other people and immediately the shidduch system lets me down like bad. And we could get into it, but again, I go back to her basically and I'm like, hey, I don't know. Let me see if I can try to convince her. And I try to convince her. She's actually, no, I just don't want to date. And I get the message and I try to really get over it and to move on. But in my mind, I'm always just, it's this person. And every date that I go on, like every person that I meet that is like so not for me. So like just a bad fit for me reinforces like that girl's the one. I want to be with her. And like every few months I would try and poke it. I would try and be like, what's going on? And it was miserable. So miserable. Something else important that I should probably say also is I did ayahuasca at some point. In the middle of all this, I do ayahuasca. Yeah.
While still religious.
It's like I was telling you, my walls start to open up. And like just seeing it. At some point, I was 23 when I did ayahuasca. I'm getting a little bit confused with my timeline because these different stories haven't necessarily merged in my head as like the whole timeline. I was 23. It was like my first job after my master's, which was awesome. I was working as a school counselor, which I loved. But basically, so I get that job it's like September. I do the ayahuasca in October. And what happened is that leading up to that, like from doing my master's and everything, I had this moment, like this epiphany, and I don't know exactly what sparked it. I was probably watching some Richard Dawkins debate or Sam Harris or something. I was just like, I don't think I believe that. I think I'm agnostic. I'm totally agnostic. And I had this huge epiphany. And I go to shul on Yom Kippur with this huge epiphany that like I'm completely agnostic. I genuinely think if I die, like maybe like consciousness maybe just emerged from my brain. And when I die, it's over and it's black and that's fine. And I'm like, wow, I was at peace with the world. And I go and I tell my friend, like one of my friends that I see at the shul there, and I'm like, hey, I'm pretty sure I don't believe in any of this. I'm pretty sure I'm agnostic. And he's like, wow, what a day to recognize that because it was Yom Kippur. So what happened is that then I had a piano lesson like that following week. And my piano teacher was a shaman and brilliant piano player, amazing piano player, taught me so much. And he's a shaman. So he invites me to an ayahuasca ceremony. I knew he was a shaman when I started working with him I was probably taking lessons from him for at least a few months. Anyways, so he invites me to a ceremony. And then I'm like, you know what? Let me think about it. And then I'll let you know. So that was Wednesday. That night, or maybe it was Thursday night, I get into this argument with my parents. Random stupid argument. I don't know what it was. And I was like, you know what? Let me just do the ayahuasca and see what ayahuasca has to show me about my relationship with my parents. I don't know. And at that time also I was reading stuff about how psychedelics are possible interesting treatments for trauma, very effective treatments. So I was like, what's interesting? Let me just see what it's about. So I was very curious. And basically I tell him like, sure, I'm going to do it. So it was that Saturday night. So I go do the ceremony and it was mind blowing ceremony, very intense. I do want to give like a disclosure that it was an extremely intense experience. And I'm not saying go out and do psychedelics, and the legality is important too. Don't do anything illegal. And also, psychedelics is a huge risk. Don't be like, okay, I'm going to do it. These other people talked about having an amazing experience. Let me do it. Psychedelics can definitely take you to hell. Be warned. Don't do this thinking that it's going to be all fine and dandy. So, anyways, yeah, I do the psychedelic experience. That changes my whole worldview. That made me totally believe in the afterlife and my soul continuing. I had past life memories. I was like, my soul is immortal. Honestly, the first thing that happened to me on this ayahuasca experience, which was so incredible, was like, I just started laughing off all of the different traumas and stupidities and pains of my life. It was the funniest thing ever. It was as if somebody finally gave me the punchline to this joke. I was just laughing it off. And the clarity that I got was like, oh, things could hurt me in this life. I could be hurt. It could even be damaging in this life. But ultimately, nothing can hurt me. This thing that I am is immortal and indestructible and is so beyond whatever. And it was like so clear. We could do a whole episode on just the ayahuasca experience. I think you've done ayahuasca too, right?
I have. It was not as fun as yours,
Oh
but
God,
very
I'm sorry.
life-changing too. For me, it was positive, but I didn't get that massive macro clarity, but I worked through some important stuff. I'm curious how you reconcile past life and immortality, which with what I believe you said you're an atheist.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm an atheist. I think I don't even know per se 100% if I'm a Spinozist. Just I've read Spinoza, and like from the things that I hear about Spinoza, like his worldview seems to align with my worldview. Like I basically I believe like everything is God, and like I again like I'm agnostic about the idea of did anything I see in my ayahuasca experience, was that all just fucking like in my head, or was it like real? I don't know. I still don't know honestly, and I'm agnostic to it for sure. What I will say is that the experience in it was so real that if that's fake, then this could easily be fake too. That experience felt so real that like you cannot even trust what real means anymore, because it's like it almost felt realer than real. So it's almost like if that's fake, this might be fake too. You know what I mean? This might be some weird simulation illusion. Who knows? But yeah, I would say, and again, like I haven't necessarily worked out like a whole metaphysical worldview about like I believe in past lives and stuff, but like I do believe that like God is everything, and we are God. I'm God. You're God. This whole thing is one. We're all part of God, and
Yeah.
yeah, a
And
wonderful.
ultimately it works for you, right? So there's a
Yeah, it works for me.
framework that probably allows you to live with more freedom,
Yeah.
more happiness, more, as you said, laughing off like past traumas and struggles and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
within that framework, you might not even be able to articulate it, because especially if I describe it, it's like describing a drug trip is one of the hardest things that you could possibly do. It's basically
Yeah, 100%.
impossible. And so you
Right.
have this vision of a world probably very different than what the world that Yeshiva shows you.
I would say honestly that yeshiva, in my mind, is almost heresy. Because I think yeshiva, and this is any organized religion. I think in organized religions, they often teach you that you are separate from God. God is this being that needs you to serve him, as if like, but yeshiva teaches you that. There's this idea of like, you're separate from God somehow. You know what I mean? And it's you're being robbed of the fullness of spiritual life. You know what I mean? You are the mystical thing. You are the thing that is so magnificent. You want to get close to God, but almost like get close to yourself in a way. That is,
Yeah. And you don't have to earn it,
yeah,
right? You don't have
you
to
don't have to earn it.
do a
Yeah.
thing that's not what's
It's
going to be
given,
the
yeah.
thing.
And I think actually what's interesting, and again, who knows what's actually real, what's not. There's a lot of Dr. Justin Sledge. He has this YouTube channel, Esoterica. In general, there's this popularism of the old esoteric beliefs. What did the Gnostics believe or whatever? Or all these different obscure faiths that are like lost to us. And of course, they're like romanticized and stuff. They were probably more similar to we are today than they had some type of enlightened truth. It was probably religion then. It's probably the same as religion now. But where am I going with this? I think that you had these concepts of apotheosis, like you could become God. And I honestly think becoming God is literally just realizing that you were actually God the whole time. And it never could have been otherwise. God was always here. He was always God.
You said you had a story about Yeshiva being heresy compared to this.
I microdosed on shrooms because we could talk about the my mushroom experiences after that. I did mushrooms twice after that, and they were actually hellish experiences. They were horrible experiences. They were too intense, and I did go to hell, or some version of intense suffering and pain. Really intense. But I wanted to microdose on it because I wanted to get some type of getting used to it almost, so that it didn't feel as intense. So I did one time, and that was also a little bit too intense. But I microdosed, and I had this experience while I was microdosing. I decided to take a shower to kind of ground myself. And I'm in the shower. I'm like washing my hair. And suddenly I look over to my windowsill on the shower. And I swear, this is the craziest thing. And it was real. There was an ant on the windowsill showering himself. The mist that was like coming off from the shower, he was like showering himself. And I see this ant. I'm like, what the hell? This ant. And it was so funny because I'm like washing my hair and I look over and there's an ant literally doing that. And it was insane. And I look over and the ant on this windowsill, it's standing on the windowsill and there's a huge drop. And one little fleck of water hits it the wrong way, it will fall down to its death. I'm looking at this ant and then immediately somehow it just hit me like a ton of bricks. That this was like I was being zapped a message. Because I was literally telling my wife this heresy thing that I was telling you about, that Yeshiva teaches God is some type of external thing. It's robbing you. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. It was like literally, it was almost like, let's say Yahweh, the being Yahweh, let's say he's real, or Zeus or whoever, pick your favorite deity. Let's imagine they're real for a moment. It was literally one of these all powerful metaphysical beings telling me, Gabi, I may not actually be God, but I am so powerful and your life is so meaningless to me that I could easily kill you, or I could easily hurt you or ruin your life, or I don't even care to do it. The same way that you don't even care to kill this ant because you don't even care. It was literally this metaphysical being zapping this message into me of just, the ant cannot perceive me. It cannot perceive what a human is. It has no fucking idea what it is. I'm a human being living in New York City, whatever the hell that's supposed to mean. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Moving to Florida. What it even is a Florida or a New York City? What are any of these things? An ant cannot begin to perceive it. And imagine there's this metaphysical being just zapping this truth into me in that moment. And then I was like, but obviously it cares enough to zap this message into me, which is something else. But that's almost what it's like. It's like, there might actually be a metaphysical being called Yahweh or Zeus or whoever. They might actually be real in some sense of the word. They might be real, but that doesn't make them God. You know what I mean? Sorry, that
Again,
was like a long rant, but
does
yeah.
it make them in any way relevant to your life, for example, right?
True.
Like,
That's
is
you.
it so far? That's the thing. I say I don't know if there's a God or not, but I can tell you with certainty that I'm not part of the plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're gonna leave it at that, and that hasn't changed.
Right.
So bringing it back to your story
Right.
of, I want to hear a little bit about how the Shidduch system let you down.
Okay. The Shidduch system is, in my mind, there are a few things that would make me think the yeshiva world is a cult. The biggest factor is for sure the Shidduch system. The other thing would probably be the immense pressure that there is to stay in yeshiva. Because, and honestly, the biggest factor that people stay in yeshiva longer than they need to or are supposed to, aside from, yeah, you're a loser if you leave or whatever, that's the mindset in a lot of cases. But it's Shidduchim. Shidduchim is, oh, you need to stay in yeshiva because of Shidduchim. And basically, Shidduchim is the way Jewish people date. To discuss it briefly, you do resumes, and it is so hyper controlled. It is so hyper controlled in the sense that you cannot just go and date a girl. What I did to go tell this girl that I wanted to go date her is insane in the community. That is not done. Maybe in modern Orthodox circles, maybe in whatever, but in Yeshivish circles, which we were a part of, that was not normal. That was not okay. I felt like for love, it's worth it. But yeah, the Shidduch system, people ruin their lives in the sense that they make all sorts of bad decisions for themselves. Their family forces to make bad decisions for themselves, all for the sake of getting a good match or just getting matched in general. Parents will send their kids to a school that is not good for them. That is literally not good for the child, but this school has a better name and it'll reflect better in Shidduchim. And parents do that. Parents hold off getting divorced. They're staying in necessarily, possibly even abusive relationships. They stay in abusive relationships because it's like, it's going to look bad on my children's Shidduchim. People stay in yeshivas when they shouldn't, and they should get a job or do something when it's just bad for Shidduchim. And the amount of control, the amount of, if you're seen in a wedding talking to somebody of the opposite sex and a rabbi or a shotgun sees that, that could reflect really negatively on you and they would blush. Oh my God, please don't. They cannot be seen talking to a guy. You know what I mean? And it's like, they're probably right, because if it's seen, they could get a bad reputation and that'll ruin their Shidduchim and it could honestly ruin their life.
The reason why that is so key in the structure of a cult is that once they have you married off and then immediately no birth control, you have kids, now you're locked
Dude,
in,
oh,
right?
oh
So
my
it's the
God, yeah.
final
Yes.
step that they need to hold. They dangle over you. They use sexual desire, basically, and
Right.
loneliness, and just that's the epitome. You've arrived. You finish your childhood. I was reminded of this after I'd left, but basically an Orthodox Jewish parent's job is only done as a parent when they marry off their kids. So it's a
Right.
coming of age for the kids, it's coming of age for the parents,
Right.
and that has to culminate in marriage, which immediately locks you into the next loop of this roller coaster, right? And
Exactly.
so it makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. It's just such a well-oiled machine that everybody is forced into this like pipeline, right?
But what's crazy also is that I talked to my wife's grandparents, and it was not like this when they were younger. When they were 18 and they're, I don't know, let's say they're 80 now, 60 years ago, it wasn't like this. They grew up in Borough Park. Borough Park is so extreme now. They said like when they were 18, that you would go to a pizza shop, it would be normal to talk to somebody of the opposite sex. They used to seat singles together at weddings. You know what I mean? Like guy and girl, go meet each other, go talk. And now it's changed in 60 years. It's not a long time. And it's just insane. It's gone to an extreme level. And you're right. It's like this pipe, and the control, it gets so bad, man. It gets really
Yeah, yeah,
bad,
yeah.
right? And especially, I think like Queens is probably a bit better. It's becoming more. I'm seeing the writing on the wall that like Queens is becoming more extreme. Brooklyn has become pretty extreme. Lakewood, forget about it. It's the most extreme. It's the most, and it's insane. It's insane, right? No birth control. You have to ask a rabbi if you're going to do birth control, which is insane. And
Yeah,
I wasn't thankfully, by the time I got married, I was out. So it was like I didn't experience any of that bullshit. But like, I can't
yeah.
even imagine what that's like.
So
Happens to me
tell me,
with
yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, sorry. It's so funny for me to talk because like, me and my wife, we got married. We had a baby right away. We didn't want to wait. We wanted to have a kid. You know?
Okay, yeah, yeah, but that came
Yeah,
not from a religious place, just from a desire,
exactly.
which is totally
It just
fine. So fill in some blanks for me around that period of time where you kind
yeah,
of go through hell with Shidduchim, end up, I
yeah,
think, leaving religion, at least you become spiritual but not religious, if I may paraphrase,
yeah,
and then you
exactly.
do find your wife, and you're already
Right.
not religious, as you said. So fill in a little bit of that info there for me.
I think the reality for me was always that I was spiritual and not religious. Like even I think growing up Bukharian, like another nice thing, growing up generally traditional, I think the concept of like everything happens for a reason. But for me, it was always like I had that like in my life feeling, oh, things happen for a reason. And I always did feel connected with God, albeit not religious. Like I mentioned, even through high school, like I wouldn't wear tefillin, I wouldn't really care. I always kept Shabbat and kosher, which was something that I just was raised with. And then I really only had that like hyper religious phase during those years when I was in yeshiva. And even then, like I always viewed it as it was a spiritual practice. And I think it still was. Like in my mind, the way I see it, and this is what's so crazy, it's like when I started to leave the religion, like to fill in these cracks, I felt like I was being rejected from God. I felt like God didn't want me anymore. You know what I mean? Like I'm being thrown out. That's how it felt. It felt so strongly like that. And I look back at it and with such gratitude and with the same concept, like everything happens for a reason. Like God wanted me to leave. And in fact, if I didn't go through that religious period that I did, probably wouldn't have married my wife, and like I probably wouldn't have met her. I probably wouldn't have gotten married when I did, and we probably wouldn't have had a kid right away. But it was only because that I was religious at that time period that kind of primed me to be like, oh, I want to get married and I want to have a kid. And it's like then I got like God wanted me to leave the faith because it was time for me to leave. I got what I needed out of it, and it was time to move on. And it felt like rejection. And then only in hindsight was I able to be like, damn, like this God, like it almost feels like God's plan here. You know what I mean? Like I see like a path for me. Like I was meant to be there. It was important for me at that time to be there. And I'm grateful because I think like a lot of other people have really traumatic experiences with their religion. And for me, like aside for the racism that I've experienced, which I don't want to minimize, I didn't really have any bad or traumatic experiences. I got into a huge fight with a rabbi, massive like debate fight, like argument where it devolved so bad. He was like accusing me that, oh, the only reason I'm having like doubts or like having my questions is because some rabbi traumatized me. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? What are you even spewing? Like I had a honestly, like I look back and I had an amazing experience. And it's you like, why do you do this? Why do religious people think that, oh, the reason they left is because they were traumatized? The reason they left is because they had some bad experience or this or that. It's just like it's all just to justify their own world. Oh, it's because they're defected. That's why they left. I'm like the normal one. I stayed. You know what I mean? And the reality is like so much. Yeah, sure. Trauma is a reason people leave, but trauma is also a big reason people stay.
No, I love it. It's a great accusation because you have those stories where it clearly was a traumatized or I didn't leave because of trauma. And I actually never heard that framing. I've said it all the time, but as a counter argument, really, of trauma is why people stay. It's like why people get sucked
Yeah,
into cults and stuff
dude,
like that.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
trauma is
love
one of
that
those.
you've introduced, I often tend to ask people at the end, make meaning for me. What's your meaning? But you've introduced it now and we are coming towards the end. And I love that, right? So you have a relationship with God and not with religion. And that is the arc that things went down. I think one question that jumps out to me right away, two questions around this period of time. Give me an example of some of the most hellish parts of Shidduchim.
Okay, so Shidduchim is honestly where all the racism from when like that went missing when I was in like my Yeshiva experience.
You found it
That's when it came
again.
out. It was like gaslighting. Oh my god, overt racism, overt. It would be like, oh, you're Bukharian, you want to date. These are the people that you can date. These are like the people that will just immediately say no to you. It was overt. People would talk about it straight up. And then it's so funny, even when I would complain about it too, I would be like, oh, Shidduchim is harder for me because there's racism, right? I think especially at the time when I was in Shidduchim, I was still basically ultra Orthodox. When I had that experience with the ayahuasca and I became very spiritual, I had a brief moment where I was like, hey, I'm agnostic and I accept this. I became again, I was like, no, I actually believe this again for some time. And then it took me some time to deconstruct the spiritual, like the things that I do believe to the things that I don't. But I was religious and I wanted to have a very religious, meaningful life. It was super yeshivish and I meant it. But yeah, it was like a lot of just who you can or can't date based on the last two letters of your last name. When I went backpacking in Israel, I found out that a lot of Ashkenazi yeshivas apparently will only accept a Sephardi boy into the yeshiva if they bring one or two other Ashkenaz boys into the yeshiva. They have to recruit in order to have their to justifiably stay in the yeshiva.
There was this one yeshiva in particular. It was run by a Sephardi
Yeah,
Rosh Yeshiva, which was already unusual. And yet, the way so they were geared towards having a quality education for Sephardi kids, which was harder to come by, right? Because you would always have a yeshiva would have 90% Ashkenazi and 10% of Sephardi. And the Sephardi people who got in were like the highest degree. It was the equivalent of like Harvard, right? If you get in as a
right.
minority to Harvard, unless they have
Yeah,
affirmative action, you're the best of the best. And that's how it was
sure.
structured there too. And this one yeshiva, it was called something Yaakov, I think, or something like that. Their way they solved this problem was it was exactly 50-50. Every Sephardi kid was paired with an Ashkenazi kid. And if an
Yeah.
Ashkenazi kid chose to come to the school, it would unlock a seat for another Sephardi kid, essentially.
Wow.
Even
Yeah.
though the Rosh Yeshiva was Sephardi. So he was bought into the racism because it was known fact if you had a yeshiva with just Sephardi kids, then your reputation plummets. You're
Which is
not a good
nuts.
school.
Yeah,
So
right.
he needed to have 50% Ashkenazi to fulfill the requirement of race, and then he had 50% Sephardi to fulfill the educational needs of supposedly his own
That's
community.
crazy.
It
Yeah,
was
that's crazy.
absurd, and I was going to talk
Right.
about that with you.
Dude,
So
that's so
basically, if I recall, this is from what I know, and correct me if this was your experience. So basically, it's a known fact. If you're Sephardi, you can generally not really date Ashkenazi women unless they have something wrong with them. They have to
exactly,
be
dude. Yeah, yeah,
divorced.
yeah.
They have to have
Right,
a kid already. They have to be
right.
disabled. There
Yes.
has to be all this stuff. And then it's now that she's dropped rank in the Ashkenazi
Exactly, dude.
world,
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
can date her. Is that
Dude,
kind of what was going on?
I don't even care, but my wife, she's Ashkenaz actually, and her parents are divorced, and and she actually wanted to date a Sephardi, but it's like that's like almost like in the Shidduch system. There's like points, almost like points. Oh, if you're pretty, that's worth a certain amount of points. If you have money, that's worth a
Money
certain amount. Yeah,
or
exactly.
esteem or prestige if your parents are a long lineage of rabbis or something like that.
Exactly,
Yeah.
prestige, stuff like that. There's like all these things like add up points. Being Sephardi like deducts 50% of your points automatically. Oh, forget it. Yeah. And then especially like Bukharian, now that's like in Queens, even more of a deduction. So that was coming in with that handicap. But I was gonna say that like I went to a Shabbat table one time with a bunch of people. And like I was explaining, like, oh, it's crazy in the Shidduch system that I'm like really struggling. I think it's a lot harder for me. He was being set up with lots of people that were like considered good matches, and like meanwhile like I was really struggling, and the people that I often was getting set up with were like people that are really like wouldn't really glance twice at. I don't want to be rude because everyone that I went on a date with, like, they were nice people, and I don't want to, not trying to say like anyone was a bad person, but like it really felt like it was very unfair. But anyways, I was at a Shabbat table and I start bringing this up, and I bring up the whole Israel thing that in some of these Ashkenazi yeshivas, that the Sephardi requirement there. And this one guy like was like slammed his hand on the table. Why are you trying to get involved in Ashkenaz circle? We should be segregated and like this and that. And I was so shocked to get like such angry over racism. Like just like basically, I was like shocked. I literally was so offended. I left.
Yeah.
But
Don't corrupt our bloodline.
literally, he might have even said that. He might have even said that. But long story short, though, when we finally got married. Okay, I'm sorry. How are you doing on time? Do you mind if I
You're
ask?
good.
I started, and every date that I went on, and it didn't work out. It again, like I was saying, I continue to ruminate about this girl. It got worse and worse, and it's getting bad. And the whole reason I even did mushrooms 2 times was to try and get over this person, and it was a hellish experience, and it did not help. In fact, it was like the first time I did shrooms, I was even told metaphysically. This is actually crazy. I saw my daughter's birth, my shrooms trip, probably a whole conversation for another podcast. But I was even told in the shroom trip, you're not going to end up with her. You don't end up with her, and it's okay. And I couldn't accept it. I was in so much pain. I was in agonizing pain. Honestly, there were like moments where I was like, I don't even want to be alive through this anymore. It was so intense and like heartbreaking. And it just would get worse and worse. Finally, this allows me permission to be like, let me just experiment. I went to a friend who lived in Texas at the time, who was not religious, and he hasn't been religious for a while. We went to high school together, and he went off the derech. But basically, I went over to him in Texas, and I was like, let me just experiment. Let me just see what's going on. And we went to a bunch of honky tonks. Honky tonks is, I don't know if people are not familiar with Texas culture, but it's basically like in a bar, and you could ask a girl to dance, and you do two-step dancing, which is like a more casual ballroom kind of dance. So I went to these honky tonks, and I was just dancing with every girl. I was just like, every girl, I was just letting me, you want to dance? And I took a lesson like before then, and I like figured out two-stepping, and I just did it, and it was awesome. And I actually started to feel better. I was actually like, I actually feel better. And like, to me, it was finally like, I literally left Judaism out of necessity. I'll tell you also, I was listening to music on Shabbat just because I was so miserable that was like, I would not be able to make it through Shabbat without music. I would not be able to. Literally, it was at that level where I got to at the end of this. I started dating 23, so like at 25, this is what was going on. Like towards the beginning of 25, I was like, I cannot make it through Shabbat, and I would cry about it. I would feel so guilty. I feel so horrible. But it was literally I needed to do it to feel better. But then finally, like I came back to that earlier question where it was like, why did I even do this? I didn't even believe it anymore. And it was like, I wanted to live a good life. And it's just becoming clear that that good life is not here for me. And it felt like so much rejection, like God did not want me and had given so much for it. It was like so painful to start to leave. So I started to leave after that Texas trip, especially. That was like a real catalyst. And I would get panic attacks thinking about eating not kosher. Not kosher for me was the hardest thing to break for some reason. I don't know why. Shabbat was a lot easier because I think it was like, again, like it was those moments like, okay, this is kind of do or die here. I need to listen to music just to get through Shabbat. But then like when I would think about eating not kosher, I would get panic attacks. It was nuts. And then also like when I would try to like actually get physical with a girl, I would get a panic attack too. Like even like physical, I don't mean like dancing was fine, touching was fine, like that I was able to break. But like moments where like I was about to kiss a girl and like I literally would have a panic attack and I couldn't do it. You know what I mean? So that was nuts. And like just going through the journey, basically, that's happening for a few months. I download apps, Hinge and stuff, and I'm scrolling on there and I really start to feel a lot better. And I had this moment, one last moment, where I was just like, you know what? I feel clear in my heart that I'm doing the right thing. I feel clear in my heart that this is the path I need to go down and I'm done with the religion. It's time for me to move on. It's not for me. But you know what? I never talked to the Rosh Yeshiva in Chafetz Chaim. Let me just talk to him. You know what I mean? I don't know what he's going to say. I have no idea, but let me just talk to him. I'll get through this and then I have clarity in my heart in case God asks me, Gabi, sure you have clarity in your heart, but you never spoke to the Rosh Yeshiva. You might as well speak to the Rosh Yeshiva. So I was like, fine, let me just do it.
Yeah.
So I set up this meeting with him and I sit there and I honestly, I started to tell him, I didn't really tell him how far it went, that I was like really off already and whatever, but and I don't believe it at all. I was just really telling him I have doubts and I was telling him it was really the Shidduch system that I've really been struggling with the Shidduch system. And he listened. He was very great. He's a very brilliant person, actually, Rabbi Grumblat. He's the Rosh Yeshiva in Chafetz Chaim. But basically, he tells me, he's like, Gabi, all these stories of this guy he was dating for 10 years and he lost hope. And then he finally meets his zivuk or whatever. It's like, Rabbi, listen, those are nice stories, but it's not doing it for me right now. So he's like, Gabi, fine. You know what? Why don't you give it 30 days? Give it 1 month. And then whatever. Just give it 1 month. One more month. So I was like, fine. I'll just give it 1 more month.
Which is the most rabbi story ever. I don't
Yeah.
even know what's going to happen next, but
Yeah,
putting
right.
everything in a 1 month timeline to put up with stupid shit is the most rabbinical Hasidic tale
Yeah, for sure.
ever. So tell me what
100%.
happens next.
It's so funny because it ends up becoming this classic story, but he tells me to give it 1 more month. At that point, I just have to say also, I stopped doing Shidduchim altogether because I was like, I'm not going to be on Hinge and be in Shidduchim. Yeah. So I stopped taking Shidduch resumes. I was like, I'm done. Basically, I'm like, fine, I'll give it 1 more month with the Shidduchim. I think it was probably that week, honestly. Somebody sends me a Shidduch resume. I wasn't going to say yes, but I got the Shidduch resume. And then basically, I'm giving a coworker a ride home, right? I'm like, what are you doing? What do you have any Shabbos plans? And he's, yeah, actually, I'm going to my in-laws for Shabbos, like my father-in-law's brother, whatever. So I was like, oh, what's their names? I don't even know why I asked, but I'm like, what's their names? He's like, oh, their last name is Taub. I'm like, Taub? That's interesting. I just got a resume of this girl Taub. And I'm like, do you know this person? He's like, oh yeah, whatever. He was actually funny. He's like, yeah, I think that's his daughter. And I wanted to ask because the picture that I got was really pixelated and it looked almost like she had a cross eye. So I was like, does she have a cross eye? So based on that, the fact that she didn't have a cross eye and stuff, and from this picture, and because of what Rabbi Grumblat said, I was like, let's go with it, right? So at this point, I'm actually really excited. I'm like, you know what? This is actually crazy. Rabbi Grumblat said, give it 1 more month. These gears are turning. Let's see what's happening. And I started dating her, and it's actually amazing. I came back home for my first date, and I had some hesitations, but I was like, I called my parents that night, and I'm like, Mom and Papa, I think I'm gonna marry this girl. And we started dating, and it's going really well. It's going phenomenally. And basically, at the time, my parents, they live in Florida half the year. It was getting really serious, and we went to Florida to go talk to them. And on that trip, I realized I was just like, it's great that this whole thing with Rabbi Grumblat said, give it 30 more days. But I'm just like, I just don't believe it. What am I going to do? Live a lie? I'm not going to marry this girl. Not being religious. I'm not going to do it. I don't believe it. What am I going to do? I can't do this. So I tell her basically, okay, look, this is what's going on. I don't believe it. And at first she was like kind of shocked. And then she actually was like, actually, you know what? I'm the same. I don't really believe it either. So we end up deciding to get married through the Shidduch system, but we both weren't religious from the beginning and we were on the same page and we both wanted to have kids. So we both had kids. Basically, we thought, and honestly, a lot of people, they do struggle, but we thought it might take a year for us to get pregnant. So we were like, okay, why go on birth control if anyways we want to have a kid? It might take a year. So who knows? Our luck, we got pregnant right away, which was great. And honestly, it's nuts. So we ended up getting married through the Shidduch system, but I just realized that I don't believe it. What am I going to do? And like now I'm like, this is exactly what God's plan was. God's plan was be here. You needed this. You got everything you needed, but you still have to get married to this person and have these children. I was planning a huge Euro trip, saving up a ton of money to do this Euro trip in the summer. Thankfully, I worked in a school, so I had the whole summer off. I was going to do a whole 2-month backpacking through Europe. And I was like, when I get to it, when I get to Amsterdam, and I don't, if things haven't escalated to that point yet, because I was getting panic attacks. Like, still, every time I would try to get physical with a girl, I would get panic attacks. I was like, listen, I need you to know I get panic attacks. I just need to experiment with this. I was like, that was my plan. But yeah, that was basically, that's basically,
Yeah, it's such an awesome arc. I love the Shidduch
yeah.
system landing you with a fellow non-practicing person that you can basically share your life with. Have you guys basically, I don't know how many years it's been, but you guys have had to be closeted more or
Yeah,
less
yes. Right.
since, though,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, we've been closeted. I think where you're asking is like, how does our family know? How did our family react? We recently came out to our family. We both decided we're going to come out to our families. Her family had the most fucking absurd reaction. Absurd. Her dad started telling her to divorce me. This is all my fault, blaming me completely for everything. I had to send him a really stern fucking text. Let me read this text to you that I had to send him. Sorry, I feel
I
bad if he
love
ends
that.
up.
By
Yeah.
the way, as while you're looking for it, I had the same thing when my wife at the time, we separated and then got divorced, and both became clear that both of us weren't religious. And she had left 9 months before I did. It was completely unrelated to me, but my
Mm.
family completely blamed her for leaving
Oh my
religion,
gosh.
and her
Yeah.
family completely blamed me. Even
Wow.
though our stories actually were completely unrelated to each other as far as religious journey was
Yeah.
concerned, and it was fascinating, like, they'd look for a scapegoat, and you're
Right.
the son-in-law, you're the daughter-in-law, you're a perfect scapegoat, and they just throw you under the bus. Anyways, back to you.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly, exactly. They blame all of them blamed me. Her siblings, her dad, everything. And her dad, oh my God, was literally telling her, calling her, telling her to divorce me. Like, I'm an excellent father. I'm an excellent husband. Like, a way better father than he ever was. Honestly,
right,
way better father.
right.
And then the audacity for him to say to divorce me was nuts. So I was like, let this thing blow over. But it was going on for a few days, and I was just like, yeah, I just have to send him this message. But I wrote, Ta, I wanted to address some things clearly. You are not entitled to tell Chaviva that she should divorce me, blame me for her personal decisions, or spread false narratives about me to other people. And he was basically telling everyone that would listen that I'm the reason that she went off the derech. And then I wrote, you also do not get to speak disrespectfully to my mother. You owe her an apology for the way you spoke to her. Chaviva and I are adults and we make decisions about our lives together. You do not need to approve of or agree with those decisions, but I need you to stop interfering in our marriage and stop spreading misinformation about me and our relationship. I'm saying this clearly over text because this has crossed the line for me. It needs to be corrected, and I do not want there to be any confusion about what I'm saying. So this is not up for debate. So I wrote that, and then it actually calmed down. And I've seen him a few times since. He didn't respond to my text at all, but I've seen him a couple of times, and he's been chill, and he calmed down, which is good. But it's nuts the kind of reaction that they had. And then honestly, my family took it extremely well because I told you my sister, she was extremely fundamentalist and then she's chilled out and stuff. So she was fine. My other sister is more traditional, like my parents. And then my parents, I was shocked. I thought my dad would take it worse, but he took it really well.
That's amazing. And
Yeah.
I love, by the way, that little modeling of setting boundaries with other people. I move back into my parents' house out of necessity, and my father starts preaching to me about who I should be with and how I should do it. And my mother tells me that I should go to couples counseling. And I was like, where were you these 6 years that I needed you? I'm done. I'm out of your life.
Yeah.
You threw me into the deep end of the pool when I was 21 years old. That was the last time you get to have a say in how I live my life. And
Right.
how dare you, as I pick up the shambles of the life that you created for me, start telling me now of all times how to live it. But I was like, you telling me who to date and who not to date and how to behave? I'm 27 years old, right?
Right.
I've already done the arc, right? You're only free from your
Yeah.
parents once you get married. I'm married
Right.
and have 2 kids, right? We're not in that boat anymore. We're freed
Right.
from it all. So I completely relate. And I love how you were able to just set that boundary and move on, and that you and your wife are on the same page. It's beautiful. And it
Yeah.
sounds, looking to the future, you guys are moving to another state
Yeah. We're
soon,
moving
right?
another
And that's
state.
like a new milestone of freedom, right?
100%.
Is she just getting a job in a regular school now? What does that look like?
For now, we're moving to Florida, and I make enough money on my salary to she doesn't want to work. If we need the money, like she'll end up being a teacher, but they pay like really terribly there. So we're just figuring it out. We're moving to 38. It's like a 20-minute walk from the beach in the Emerald Coast. It's a great place. I don't know if people have seen it. It's like my wife literally found it on TikTok, and then since discovering it, she's been begging us to move. And I'm like,
We're
no, I
moving
really
there.
want to
That's
stay.
amazing.
Mm.
Happy for you guys.
Can I backtrack?
Yeah, yeah.
That sucks.
Yeah, that it was such a miserable year. One of my worst years in a lot of ways. It was also a year of a lot of freedom, kinda I left religion at the same time, but
Wow.
that exploration happened. My father didn't talk to me for 5 years
Seriously? Oh my God.
from that point on. So
Yeah.
it's completely
Yeah.
conditional on me showing up a certain way, and that's been a recurring theme
That's
too.
so tough. That's also a big issue in the community. Like I think people will apologetically say, "Oh, that's not correct Judaism or something to disown your child," but it's this shit is happening and nobody's doing anything about it. You know what I mean? People are disowning their kids for things like this and this conditional love. That's not okay. Even though there's no rabbi saying you should disown your kids, and I'm sure there are rabbis saying that, but it's just this is what happens. It's nuts.
Yeah, I had an experience where my brother was hit in a hit and run accident. Thankfully, he was okay, but there was a period of time which was it was really shocking. He was in California. I had to call my parents and tell them, and it was during COVID also. So we're all like scrambling to take care of him and get him what he needs, and it was really hard to get anything in the hospital. And my parents are very well connected, and they had these contacts with doctors, and they were pulling all the strings that the Jewish community is able to pull, which is great and beautiful and nice. And then comes Shabbat, Friday night comes around. My parents are even earlier; they're ahead because they're in Israel, and they go silent because it's not a life-threatening illness. So now their son, who's in hospital, who's been hit by a car less than 2 days ago, they're going to find out in 25 hours how he's doing because it's not life-threatening, and they leave
Wow.
me, their older brother, to continue picking up the pieces for several more
Mm.
hours because I did. That was the point that I realized that the problem with Judaism and religion in general, when it's taught like this, is that it's God first and your own family second. Right? That they're literally by following the rules of the religion to the book, which is how it says to do it. The book literally says, first you follow God and then you take care of your children. And I see my father not talking to me for 5 years. He was a victim of that same mindset where first of all, you all need to observe God's will. And Shalom Tzvi is doing all sorts of things that God says not to do. So you're just furious at him. But that is a victim of the completely displaced hierarchy that most people in the world don't suffer from, thankfully,
Right.
and shouldn't.
And I'm curious also, I don't know your dad and I don't know most people, but like how much is it that it's actually God first? You know what I mean? Is it actually God that they're putting first? Like I'll tell you, I'll just give you an interesting anecdote. One of the things, oh my God, from leaving the religion, there's been so much freedom that you don't even necessarily anticipate. But one of the things is like sometimes I'll see somebody being like, "Oh, has it been 6 hours yet since I've eaten meat?" And I'm like, in that moment, is God even present? The idea of what does God actually want from me in this moment? Is God even present? You know what I mean? Is this actually about God? Like when they're taking away the magic treehouse from the children, is that actually about God? I don't
One
think
of the
that's it.
biggest, I think one of the things that illustrated it to me the most when I was still religious is the classic paradox where you debate whether you want to eat bread because you don't feel like having a ridiculously
Yeah.
long blessing afterwards.
Yeah.
And it's like weird. Is this a beautiful thing that you bless God after the meal, or is it clearly a burden that you can't be bothered to eat? But
Right.
you forego eating bread, which you want to have because you can't be bothered to do this ridiculously long blessing that starts talking about Jerusalem and all sorts of random shit just because you ate some bread. I get it.
Right.
I always got it, but it's really weird because it's always framed as like a beautiful thing, but it's so clearly a drudgery for people that
Yeah.
they're burdened by it all. My father is an interesting mix because on paper and to some degree, there's a lot of like just blind intellect. It was proven to me when I was 20 that God exists. Therefore, I have to do everything that this book says I need to do. So that on paper, and to his credit, over the years, he has not really veered from that much. My mother has gone a lot more kind of, oh, hippie tzfat, what God really means. It's like she still follows religion most to a large degree, but the philosophy for her is this amorphous. It's a feeling. It's just a feeling.
Mhm.
But my dad is blind intellect, but I believe that nothing is ever blind intellect. And there's a crazy amount of emotional world that's being propped up with
Right.
scaffolding that the intellect is protecting him from so much, right? And this
Mhm.
obsession with morality, I think, gives you a really clear framework of like black and white and wrong and right. And it makes the world a safe place when emotionally maybe it feels extremely unsafe. So that to me
Dude,
is the layer
yeah.
deeper that I see.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like bouncing off of that's actually so real too about like when people are leaving, I think one of the biggest struggles is you don't even realize, but like Judaism or any religion, it like frames your whole life, right? And then when that starts getting deconstructed, it's not like a pleasant experience. That's part of what causes panic attacks. I'll tell you, in my mind, sometimes like the panic attack would be like connected to an idea, even too. If I wanted to eat this non-kosher, like I would get almost like this delusion, and mushrooms does not help with this, but I would get this delusion almost of, wait, what if this whole life thing that I've just been living is this weird AI experiment to try and see like how long can you get a person to believe in something that's clearly not true, and then I would get a fucking panic attack. I'll be like, what if I eat this pork and like I get like the simulation's over? You know what I mean? Because okay, we've run the test, and I'm like, oh my god, literally it would be like that, and like it's hard. And why would like bizarre thoughts like that come in? It's because like my whole framework of how I saw the world, like like God and what is the world and what are the metaphysics and everything. Like you have an answer to all those things in Judaism. It's comforting, and it's like once that gets deconstructed, it's like extremely painful. And that's honestly probably why people feel so threatened by like people that go off, because it's like
Yeah.
it questions their wait. You could go off and be normal and everything's okay. That's not possible.
I remember I would get a head rush when I would walk into certain places like a bar or movie theaters, which were like big
Mm,
no-nos.
yeah,
My
right.
system, the way I understand it is like my psyche could not reconcile that level. This can't be happening
Right.
because it is so far removed from an acceptable reality. And when
Oh
I work
man.
with people with religious trauma, the need to basically learn from scratch how to make choices and how to figure out what you want, because you're building that from scratch. Because until now, you've been told what to want and what to think, and it's suddenly a lot of decision making fatigue and a lot of uncertainty, because there's so much of life is actually gray and actually vague, and there is no right answer, and you're coming out of a place where you're told exactly what is right and what is wrong, and it's very overwhelming.
Yeah, it is. It's completely overwhelming. But I will say that I think for people really struggling, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And it's look, I can't speak for other people, but for myself, it's like I think I've become a more thoughtful and better person because of it. You know what I mean? And actually having to work through what I believe, what I don't believe, instead of just having inherited whatever beliefs that I had. Now I've actually worked through and I think about things, and it's interesting. It's opened me up to a whole new world, and I think philosophy has a lot to say. But nothing can really replace the experience. Nothing can replace like when you start to go off and you pick up the pieces, and a certain philosophy emerges almost, and it catches you, and you're okay. And it does feel scary. And I think for people struggling that need to leave, there's light.
And I think that's a perfect segue to basically my last question for you. As a mental health professional, as you reflect on your own experience, what you've seen with others, what's like the big picture takeaway? And it could be advice, but it could also be perspective. Like, how do you
Right.
understand Orthodox Judaism, organized religion, the process of leaving? I know these are big questions, and I'm keeping them purposely broad because I want to kind of give
Yeah.
you that final kind of say
Yeah.
on what's your take, meta level, with your professional hat on.
With the professional hat on, I'm a humanistic therapist. So I've worked and I do work with people of all sorts of faiths. I've worked with religious people, secular people, Hindus, Buddhists, everything, Christians, Muslim, and everybody. So I always defer to the client. Whatever my beliefs are, it's irrelevant, right? I need to be a good, like, reflective board for my client. And it's like, I work with, even like within Hindu faith, like I was not raised Hindu at all, but like we use that as like tools and resources. We reflect on the faith, and these things are reminders. And all the faiths, I'll always do that. Christianity too, and everything. Even though I don't believe it. And again, it is like a tricky area, right? Because you're always gonna have some type of bias that's going to be in the room. It's like when I feel the need to say something, I will literally say, "Oh, do you mind if I share something from my own experience?" Again, I'm not an authority. Like this is just something what I'm feeling now that I want to share because I feel like it is important for how I'm conducting the conversations. I try not to. It's just my style of therapy. I don't like to. I like to be there for the client and like what the client needs. And if I felt like they needed to hear a personal story or something, or if I felt like my counter transference is coming up, like then I'll address it. But yeah, the way I see it, and this ties into my like greater philosophy, which is like your question is like I think God wants all of these things. I think God wants there to be Christians and Jews and atheists and people questioning and people transitioning from this one to that one and Hindus and Buddhists and whatever religion you might conceive of. I think they've all emerged and they're here for a reason, and like they are there for like they're supposed to be there. God wants there to be these people. I think even to a degree, I think God wants there to be people that believe so strongly that theirs is right and everyone else's is wrong that they're like sucked into this as this is the only way to do it. I obviously think extremism, in my view, I think extremism is horrible and bad and leads to really wrong things. But I think that for a person's individual life story, I don't know, the way I'm kind of tongue tying myself a little bit because I feel a little bit like I don't necessarily have it worked out fully myself. But yeah, I think, for example, in my case, I think God wanted me to be completely invested and in this. and fully sincere about it, and I gained stuff from it. But I can't speak for other people or necessarily say that with as much confidence, because it's like you have other people that were really abused, that were really taken advantage of. And it's like, I don't think that God wanted that. So I'm not going to say that's a little bit why I'm hesitating. But
There's the
yeah,
dilemma, right?
exactly.
When you attribute everything back to God, then how do the really evil things manifest? And I'm sure if you are
Yeah,
on ayahuasca and you zoom far enough back, it becomes trivial. It becomes just a little
sure.
blip. That's how I would
Right.
imagine it maybe shows up.
Yeah.
It's hard when you're in the middle of it.
For sure, and I would never say that. I would never say to somebody that went through some terrible trauma and be like, "Oh yeah, don't worry, your soul is immortal and completely unaffected." It's insensitive, honestly, to say it. If they believe it, that's amazing for them, and that could be very healing if they come to it on their own. But it's not something somebody else should say to them.
I remember this was one of the things I resented the most. I started after a few years to really share my story on Facebook, for example, and a
Sure.
lot of it was just my story, and some was like really angry rants and a lot of satire. And everyone, so many people were like, "Get over it, man." That was, and now you're not there anymore, so just stop being angry.
So
This
sensitive, dude.
"get over it, man" is a very religious way response that's very, let's call it, not trauma informed, to put it
Right.
mildly. And it doesn't respect the deeply ingrained 27 years of me being in it. Why do you think that I can just get out of it, right? I spent a lot
Right.
of time in here. I can't snap my
Yeah.
fingers even if I want to,
You
and believe
can't,
me, I
dude.
want to.
Like the amount of shit that you've been indoctrinated into, you can't snap your fingers and get over it. If you could, you would.
Yeah, I had a doctor on the show recently, and she was like, "Your brain has literally shaped itself
Right.
physiologically
It has,
around
yeah.
in a certain shape. And now
Right.
that you believe something different, that's great, but your brain doesn't have the brain shape to support this new way of being. Now you start
Yeah.
to create neural
Yes.
pathways in different directions that your brain has never even thought of."
By the way, I remember what I was gonna say before, because you were saying, like, when you get into the nitty-gritty of it, like, how could God want I don't necessarily believe in an all loving God. That's honestly how I get around it. Like, in my mind, I'm like, God could wa maybe God finds wars entertaining. I really don't know. I don't know God's perspective. Maybe God
Okay.
is down for evil. That's how I solve it, but
Yeah.
in my head,
Honestly, I related to, even when I was religious, I never understood this, like, this basic premise and fairly I in Jewish philosophy, starting from at least the Derech Hashem Lutzato of like last 250 years. But when he wrote Derech Hashem, and he was like, God is good, A, therefore everything in existence is good. I was like, how did
yeah,
you get that first point? Like,
yeah.
I
Like, why
experience
do
the
you believe
world
God
as
is
more bad than good, personally. I have a
interesting?
negativity bias and a ton of trauma, and I find existence miserable on a day-to-day basis. And so
Damn,
where
dude.
did you get this starting point upon which
Right.
everything else is predicated? So, like, yeah, maybe God does exist, but maybe he's a masochistic son of a bitch, sadistic son of a bitch,
Right.
and
Totally,
that's
right.
the starting point. So, yeah, maybe he exists, but I don't want to have anything to do with him. You know,
Exactly, dude.
I heard people say all the cool people are in hell.
But to your point about, like, maybe God is sadistic, this is what's so funny. When I was on that mushroom trip, and, like, this was at the end of the trip, I was like it came to me that, "You're not gonna be with this girl." And I was like, "I am in so much fucking pain that it's not okay, I don't accept it." And they're like, "How is that fair? Like, things don't need to be fair. Are you kidding me? Like, you could have been created and completely created just to suffer and be tortured, and your whole existence would just be suffering, and there would still be no fair or right or wrong or whatever." And then it was like, "Look," and this was the end of my trip. When I was a kid, sometimes I would get into the shower wearing socks. I was like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years old. And I still remember this feeling. I'll get into the shower and I was still accidentally, I forgot to take off my socks. And it would be the most uncomfortable feeling. But the water would get on my socks and it would be like just this weird, like super uncomfortable feeling. So the end of my trip, they were like, you could have just been born suffering and there would be no, like, it would just be what it is. It's just what it is. And basically, I was like almost transformed like onto a beach and I was wearing my socks and I was completely paralyzed and just these waves would just come right over my socks, like complete and like feeling this feeling. And it felt, I kid you not, it felt like eternity. Next thing I know, I wake up in my friend's bed where we had like we did the shrooms trip in his apartment. Next thing I know, I wake up in my friend's bed and I was sober. You know what I mean? Like that was the end of my trip. And it was like, yeah, maybe like I don't know. Yeah, there could be suffering in this world. God might not be like all good in the sense that like suffering is not like I don't know. Maybe God is yeah, maybe God's a sadist. Who knows? Right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're at time. I don't know if you want to
Oh
add
yeah.
anything else
No.
to end on a different note, but honestly, this is very par for the theme of this thing. This has been quite the adventure, and I love how much detail is in your stories. You have these anecdotes. Not everybody has the level of granular detail in their story of leaving, and I love that we got you with all these stories. So it's, I think, a really cool glimpse into your life at various points. And that we got you so fresh, right? This is You've been out for a few years, but this is
Yeah.
your coming out story. So it's a real honor to have it on here. and we'll
Yeah,
publish it as soon as you're ready for us to.
thank you, man. And Shalom Tzvi, I just want to say thank you so much. You've been a great listener. I normally on my podcast I try not to talk so much, but like this was very refreshing for me to find.
People don't
Yeah, man,
realize
was
when you have
great.
a podcast, you generally
Yeah,
don't get to talk much. It's terrible.
yeah,
Anyways,
yeah.
Gabi, thank you so much.
So thank you so much. I'm so honored.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Belief. If you found the episode inspiring, please share it with others who might benefit from it, and be sure to subscribe to it to get updates about future episodes.